Kong. I'm Andy Curtin. I'm here with Vivek Mabubani.
Yep. Over here.
Where do people find you online, buddy?
You can find me at Funny Vivek, sometimes with letter M. If you're in a good mood, type it twice. It doesn't matter. It's still me.
Yeah, you can find me at Andy Curtin on all of the usual platforms. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please hit subscribe. And we have a Patreon account, patreon.com/HoHoPod. If we get 10 more Patreons, we'll be upgrading my microphone, your microphone.
It depends on who's talking more this episode.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to go with me.
Okay.
Now, today's guest, I have to say a huge thank you to Cassie Thomas for getting us connected with Guy Shirra. Guy, how you doing?
I'm fine, thank you. Yes, here we are in Sai-Kung, in a quiet little park, away from the buzz of Sai-Kung.
This is not normally where we record the podcast, I'll be honest with you. It's the first time in the Sai-Kung Park. But Guy was a British police officer in Hong Kong from 1967 to 1997, which already people listening, anyone is going, all right, I mean...
I was still like a protein back then. Anyway.
Yeah, that's not what I would think of, but all right.
Reincarnation, now's another life. Let's go on.
So you have so many great stories, and I know because I've read your book, Accidental Prawn, which if you want a good book about Hong Kong, it's awesome. Accidental Prawn is the name of the book.
On sale in all the good bookshops.
Yeah, where are you? Bookazine? Where do people find the book?
Bookazine and Kelly and Walsh Hong Kong Book Centre. That's it, I think, at the moment. Oh, you can also pick up a copy at the Green Hub, the old Typo police station. Yeah.
Ah.
I'm usually hanging at the old Typo police station. That's my regular. No.
The old one is fine.
So I there's a lot of stuff I want to get into with you, but in a sort of a briefer introduction, like how did you end up in Hong Kong? Like what got you out here?
Well, I was doing sixth form studies in a public school in the UK, and I was in the science stream, and I planned to become a veterinary surgeon. So I managed to scrape a place at Edinburgh University, but it was 7 years and I was already put off studying. And a friend of mine had managed to do voluntary service overseas. And I thought, I'll apply for that. And they accepted me.
Is that specifically police service?
Oh, no, nothing to do with the police whatsoever.
This is Borneo, right?
Voluntary service overseas was started in 1958. As a way of getting school leavers to go and do something useful overseas, especially in Commonwealth countries, before they went on to university or some other career. And in fact, it started in Sarawak in Borneo in 1958, and that's where they sent me. And I was sent to teach in a government secondary school in the second largest town in Sarawak called Miri.
And how much did that just explode your understanding of the world and what else is out there?
Well, exactly. I think I'd only been as far as Norway as a child at the age of something like 9 years old, and the Channel Islands when I was 15, and that's about it. So flying out to Kuching. By way of all kinds of exotic places.
You had to stop, I remember you stopped like 5 times to get there, right?
Well, that's right, yes. It was a BOAC flight, and we stopped in all kinds of places. I remember I think it was Damascus. We arrived in the middle of the night. It was about 40 degrees or something in the middle of the night.
Probably looked better then than it does now.
In 1967, there were all kinds of odd things going on, and they loaded us off the plane, and soldiers marched us into a Nissan hut while the plane was refueled.
And that was your first trip?
There was no duty-free. and we wondered,
like a bottle of alcohol
whether we were under arrest. So
you were under arrest?
No. We wondered if we were. We don't know what the hell was going on.
They wouldn't explain what's going on, right?
And then in another place, we landed in Colombo, in what was then called Ceylon, right?
Sri Lanka.
And we were sitting outside at a little table getting some refreshment, again, while the plane was being refueled. And a whole bunch of Ceylonese kids on the other side of the fence were screaming and shouting, I think because they thought we were the Beatles. we all had long hair, and of course I had a rather long nose.
I think you kind of enjoy that. You're like, yes, I am.
I would like people to think I was the Beatles at least
even
once in my life.
Yeah, even if
That'd
it
be
actually
nice.
Ringo Starr, I'll take it. Fine, whatever.
Yeah, I'll take George Harrison.
Then, of course, we landed in Singapore, but we were late landing because of a thunderstorm over Kuala Lumpur. And we missed our connecting flight to Kuching. So the British BOAC quite routinely stuck us in the Raffles Hotel.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm fascinated about that because when I go to Singapore and see Raffles, I know that it's all done up and new, but I do feel like I'm seeing what Singapore of old. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a wonderful old building with a lot of history. The Somerset Maugham and the Long Bar and the Singapore Sling and all of that. And we were in the two rooms. There were four of us, and we were in two rooms right on this garden. And we missed the dinner, and we were thrown out of the dining room because they were going to charge us, right?
Yeah.
It was, and I said, "Oh, we got to get out of here. We can't afford this." So we had to leave that, and we got sandwiches. Next morning, we rang the British Council, and they said, "Oh, where are you? Raffles Hotel." "What? You can't stay there." Then they sent a van round for us, and they put us in the Seaman's rest home.
I'm guessing it was didn't have the swan towel folded on the bed. Like they did at Raffles.
They had, it was quite ramshackle. It had wooden screens and ceiling fans. And
Have you been back to Singapore much since then?
oh yeah,
Can you visualize how different it is from that
oh,
time?
enormously different. I mean, I think one of the biggest differences is that in '65, the Singapore River was a filthy quagmire. Jam full of sampans and a lot of trading going on. And, of course, now it's not. It's a clean, pristine river, and there's none of that going on. But the Singapore government acknowledges its history and there are interesting statues in that area which depict the way it used to be.
I love that when you go to the Singapore History Museum, it says that their goal was to be the Liverpool of the East.
Now
Which I guess at the time Liverpool was a very important, shipping.
I don't remember Singapore producing any hot rock bands, but otherwise maybe.
I think it was more. But it's funny because Singapore is I think a little bit nicer than Liverpool.
Certainly warmer.
Yeah. So just jumping into Hong Kong, you were hired as a police officer before coming to Hong Kong, right?
I had always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to be a police officer. I'd looked at the army and I thought, if there was nothing going on at the time in respect of wars or Northern Ireland, and I thought, you join the British Army and you'll just be training. What will you really be doing? And I thought, you become a police officer, you're doing practical work, and hopefully you're, used to the community, doing something interesting, maybe exciting, and certainly useful. So, when I came back from Sarawak to Birmingham, which is near where I lived, I wandered into the Birmingham City Police, and they really gave me the brush off. They said, "Well, basically, you're too short. You're short a couple of But I think they didn't really feel comfortable with me, my background. Perhaps, I don't know.
Yeah, that's true. It's kind of hard disciplining people when you have to look up. You're like,
You're
hey,
not that short. What are you talking about?
That's what I mean.
You're like giants.
Yeah.
In those, minimum height was 5'8", and I was a third of an inch short. I think that was good enough for them. And I...
Maybe I'm just short.
Yeah. So I then I went down to London. I saw some special recruitment officer, and he said, "Well, these 6 forces are really hard up. You could write to them." And I said, "Well, what's going on overseas?" He said, "Oh, you could go round to the Crown agents." And I walked into the Crown agents and said, "What have you got?" And they said, "Oh, Hong Kong, or I think it was Bermuda. It might have been the Bahamas. I can't remember which." But they said, "Oh, if you go to Hong Kong, You'll be a probationary inspector. Your pay will be better than if you go to the Bahamas. And I thought, oh, Hong Kong, not very far from Sarawak. I rather like that idea.
Right. Well, one thing I want to ask you is because you're a pretty passionate lover of Hong Kong, it seems to me. Did you, even at Sarawak, you sort of discovered that Asia had something that really fascinated you, really caught your eye. Is that fair?
Oh, yes, indeed. I mean, Sarawak had a very, very interesting mix of people, right? So you had Chinese, Malays, and then you had all the indigenous groups who were all fascinating. The school that I taught in had a whole cross-section of those, boys and girls, all thrown into one class, 30 in a class, all getting on really well. Standard of English was very high. When school holidays came around, I did my very best to get as far upriver into the Ulu as I could. But at that time, what was called the Konfrontasi, a war was going on between Malaysia and Indonesia. Indonesia was trying to invade the Sabah, British North Borneo, Sarawak, and Brunei from Kalimantan, which is east, the largest part of Borneo.
Did you feel a danger at all?
No. But it was.
Is that just because you laugh in the face
there were
of danger?
signs of activity.
I'm hearing it. I'm like, this is like your kind of initial time in Asia, and you're like calm about it.
I'll go where the war is. That seems safe.
Yeah.
So, the Malaysians had a hell of a lot of help from Australians, New Zealanders, and the Brits, of course, and they saw off the problem. It's a sort of forgotten, undeclared war called the Konfrontasi.
That's a great name, Konfrontasi, man.
Yeah.
I could do that with my girlfriend next time. We're having a Konfrontasi.
Yeah.
It's an undeclared war between us.
Sounds adorable.
We're going to have a Konfrontasi again, aren't we?
Like, are there people dying at Konfrontasi? It sounds like, it sounds like we can't decide on what the hors d'oeuvre should be.
Exactly. I have one Konfrontasi, please.
So you enlisted as a probationary inspector.
That's right.
Came out here. How do you remember? You must have landed at Kai Tak.
Yep, we landed at Kai Tak, and we were given a quite fair bit to drink by a welcoming party of existing recruits, I think, then loaded into the back of Bedford lorries and carted over on the ferry, Cross Harbour Ferry, no tunnels in those days, and up Stubbs Road and down the other side to Wong Chuk Hang, the police training school.
Oh.
Now, in those days, it was surrounded by market gardens and, paddy fields, and it was very semi-rural.
Is that the one right next to Ocean Park right now?
That's correct,
Oh, this is bizarre. So when you go to Ocean Park
so
now,
busy now. It's such a dense...
Yeah, so there was none of that
there
then. And
which makes sense. I mean, if you're going to have people practice gunshots and everything, you want to be away from where people are.
We were given a welcome, but it was a very sort of lukewarm. What do you call it now? Razzing or something?
Raising.
Yeah,
were you like
trying to?
Because you did it as well.
Well, we did it. We did a far better job. I think.
So just so you know, like when they get the new recruits in, they just try to freak them all out.
Oh,
and make
So
them
what's
panic.
the word?
Raising.
Raising or razzing or whatever.
Yeah, so
raising is what
actually-
they do, like when you go to like an American fraternity and they bring them in and take their clothes off.
Oh
and
yeah,
run
that's
around
what
with
happens
Yeah.
when I went to university as well. Here, that's what they do.
So,
Like, when you, yeah.
Our method was basically to grab everybody off the trucks and scare the shit out of them, if I can say that. And my contribution to that was to go for one of my very long runs. And come back utterly exhausted, and be yelled at by a colleague of mine pretending to be a chief inspector. Get your butt up here, Shirra! And then I was paraded in front of these raw recruits with hardly any hair. Did you get your hair cut? Yes, sir, yes, sir. Well, that'll teach you to get your hair cut. Otherwise, it'll be another 15-mile run, Mr. Shirra. Get lost, And any idea that they thought this might be a wind-up disappeared. and then our Canadian guy was playing the doctor, and he comes in wearing a white coat and says, right, sorry, Chief Inspector, but the lab's not available. we'll have to do the injections over in B block or something. And by that time, they'd been told to take their trousers off in preparation for a jab for some berry or something like this. And right, no time to put your trousers on, by the front, double march. And we double them out of the building across what was virtually an open road into B block, which in fact B block was the mess. And but it was very funny watching people trying to hold on to their tackle if they were wearing
the funny thing is, while this is going on, their parents are probably thinking, my child's a police. He's going to be in the police force. You're like, no, look at what they're doing. Look at what they're doing right now.
No phones back then, man.
I know.
Nobody was saying anything.
Only there was the social media. Oh, man.
Yep. But I think we had a Chinese commandant, Fong Yik Fai. He was a great bloke. He had a lot of medals in the Second World War and this kind of thing. And I believe a previous occasion, they dressed up one of their local colleagues and pretended he was the commandant, and who couldn't speak any English, and then harangued them all in Cantonese.
Yeah.
And, they were left nonplussed. And then, unfortunately, the real commandant then walked into the mess. And they all turned around and gave him the finger and told him to get lost.
And when you're all like, no, you will actually have a tough time.
Oh, man.
So coming in at 1967 is an interesting time because at that point, corruption was pretty severe in the police force, right?
Well, of course, unfortunately, we had no knowledge of that. And while we were still at the training school, we were plunged into what was called the confrontation. A spillover, not the confrontation, but it was called the confrontation. It was a spillover from the Cultural Revolution in China, and it was a left-wing insurrection, basically. And so...
so people from the mainland coming over the border and
so we
trouble.
were doing that for over a year, fighting ultimately what was local terrorism with bombs,
handmade bombs,
killing and maiming people. Yeah, so there was no real policing, no normal policing, and it wasn't until after that was over in '68 that I began to realize that perhaps all was not as it seemed. Patrolling around the streets of North Point and Causeway Bay.
Two little anecdotes that I just want to attach to that, which I picked up from the book, was this where they had to use bamboo poles to set off these IEDs that were left in the street. And there was one horrible story where two little kids found a bag and opened it, and both of them died. There was real terrorism going on in the streets.
That's correct. Yes, we had our own bomb disposal officer. But we had a lot of help from the British Army, technical officers who were deployed in teams, one technical officer and police officers to help him cordon the scene and all of that. But they were still overwhelmed at points. There were a lot of what we called hoax bombs. They would make up a package, write on it, "Comrades keep clear," and plant them in the middle of the road or the tram tracks, places like that. And they'd usually have to be treated as the real thing. So, but a large percentage of them were real and caused deaths and injuries. As you say, the worst example were these two little children who played with a package in a back street leading to a school in North Point. That was absolutely terrible. But as a patrol officer, if you came across something and you thought, well, that's really too small to be a real IED, so I'd find a bamboo pole and stand sideways behind a lamppost and poke it. If it didn't go off, then that was fine.
Well, because also it would have been a big use of resources and affecting, traffic and everything else to classify, to say we have a potential IED. Let's get the team in, right?
You had to exercise some common sense. Unfortunately, there were a couple of instances where police officers thought they could deal with something which is much larger, a carrier bag or something like, or a school bag, and they tried to deal with it using a piece of string or something, and it exploded and killed them and killed other people. So, yeah.
And that's what led to the ban on fireworks in Hong Kong.
That's right. Well, initially they were making IEDs out of the black powder from fireworks, so that they stopped.
So the moral of this lesson is, if there's like a little bag on the street, don't touch it.
Not if it says only for comrades stay away or whatever.
So now I know what to do.
That's the only Cantonese I'm
This
going
is
to
what I'm actually going to put on my bag from now on. People just don't steal my stuff. All my valuables in there. Just comrades stay away.
That's actually brilliant.
Perfect security over there. And I'll have a bamboo stick next to it.
My daughter went to university in Birmingham, and unfortunately her bag was offloaded one stop before she was supposed to get off. And the police came along and blew it up. So welcome to the UK.
Wow. I was in Charles de Gaulle in Paris with my brother, and there was a lot of screaming and everything standing around, and there's this bag sitting there, and they've brought in the bomb squad to set it off, and everyone's standing there watching.
Yeah,
and I
like
look at my brother, I'm like, if that's a bomb, we don't want to be standing here. We were walking the other direction.
And
the explosion to set it off went off. But thankfully there wasn't actually, it was just someone's makeup or something, I think.
You sure those were bombs and not like bad breakups where the boyfriend's trying to get rid of a girlfriend's belongings? Like, I'm going to blow that stuff up in the street.
It was definitely some sort of confrontazi. No question about it.
Definitely the confrontazi happening over there.
Now, another thing that I wish we could talk to you about for 5 hours, honestly, is the Kowloon walled city.
Aha.
So people, if you don't know about the Kowloon walled city, it was... Actually, can you tell us what it was?
The Kowloon walled city was originally a walled city with a Chinese magistrate and a contingent of Chinese troops. And it was the center of administration for the general Hong Kong area, right? And when the British got the... secession of Hong Kong and Kowloon up to Boundary Street, that was initially excluded. And the Chinese had the right to march in and out of there to a stone pier, which in fact
So it was almost like an embassy situation?
They discovered that recently. When I say recently, 2 or 3 years ago, they found that. When they were excavating the area for the new MTR tunnel or something like that. Anyway, but I think a year later, the British decided that wasn't working, and it was absorbed, as far as the British was concerned, into Kowloon. The Chinese always said, well, no, it wasn't. So it developed into... the Japanese pulled down the wall and used it to build the airport. And after the war, it became a hotbed of vice and drugs and all kinds of odd activities, including illegal dentists. If you wanted a cheap job on your teeth, you could go to the wall city,
pick up some opium,
and sit in an alleyway and get your teeth done. It
was also astoundingly dense as well, right? I think it might have been the densest living conditions on Earth.
Oh, yes, I would agree. I mean, the building regulations were totally ignored as well. So there were very, very narrow alleyways, probably up to, I don't know, maybe 10 stories maximum. But the alleyways were wet pipes, burst pipes, wires. You could hardly see the sky. Yeah, it was very, very Dickensian, and had a dreadful reputation. And the police, as far as the police was concerned, I was there in 1974, and we didn't patrol it as a normal beat, which would have been 1 constable during the daylight and 2 during the darkness. This was a sergeant and 2 or 3 constables.
Because they might get overwhelmed.
24 hours, yeah.
24 hours.
Yeah, I had several interesting escapades in the walled city while I was there.
I know you raided a couple of opium dens in there.
Yeah.
Did you kick the door down or push the door?
One of my sergeants got some information about an opium den. It was midwinter. It was very, very cold. And we put in a cordon and hid there, hoping that a customer would come and either go in or go out. Nothing happened, so we had to ring the bell in the end. And
that old chestnut.
This old bloke who was, in fact, the divan keeper came down, but he'd obviously rung an alarm bell, and the smokers were on, I think, the 3rd floor, and they started jumping from one building to another.
But this seemed like a common thing with opium raids, is that people would start popping out the windows, right?
Well, yeah, but this was pretty spectacular. But one bloke didn't make it and landed at my feet, and I arrested him, and the other police rushed in, and they caught about 4 smokers who were too far gone on the opium to even consider escaping, and the old man. And then a constable at the back said, I saw a woman on the 1st floor get up, switch the lights on, hide something behind a pillar, it seemed, and then shut the lights off. So we raided her place too, and I found a large quantity of prepared opium hidden in a cavity behind a mirror on the wall. And she was the one running the place, but we couldn't link the two. She didn't have the keys for the divan upstairs or vice versa. So we just charged them separately. One was the opium divan, and she was possession of dangerous drugs for trafficking. Both the same maximum sentence of life if it was in the High Court. But
did she have any look, like when you see her, you're like, yeah, she's definitely up to no good? Like, or did she have that comical curl in her hair, smoking?
Look like a nice lady.
Yeah, nice lady.
Real quiet type.
Exactly. Yeah.
I can't really remember. She didn't kick up any great fuss. What happened after that was very interesting, because we got them back to the station. They were charged, and it seemed as if when they got to court the next day, she abandoned the old guy, and she paid for herself to get court bail and refused to pay for him. Maybe she was annoyed that he'd answered the door or something, I don't know. And he went off to Lychee Remand Centre, where he was asked by the Correctional Services, then known as the Prisons Department, have you got any complaints to make? And he said, yeah, that bloody inspector in Kowloon City let the woman go, and I'm locked up here. So they then called in the ICAC.
Which is the corruption,
yeah,
right?
Independent
ice cream and coffee, or interfering with Chinese ancient customs. Or anyway, so I was then
like interfering with ancient Chinese customs is the best.
Yeah, that's good.
So I was told to expect the presence of ICAC in the courtroom when the case was being heard. Right, so I turned up there. And sure enough, there were a couple of blokes in suits at the back who were avoiding eye contact. And I got in the witness box to give evidence against the old guy. And sure enough, he cross-examined me and said, what did you do with the woman? And I played along with this for a while and watched these 2 guys scribbling away in their notebooks at the back. I said, what woman? He said, the woman you arrested. I said, Your Worship, we didn't arrest any woman in connection with this opium divan case. Oh, you're referring to the woman we arrested downstairs.
Yes, the other because you couldn't connect.
We
the cases.
Charged her separately, and here is the notice to witness for her court case tomorrow.
Did you love watching him lose his mind when you were like, you know which woman I'm talking about? You're like,
boy, well, obviously he was still unhappy about the fact that he'd been abandoned by her. But these 2 guys from the ICAC were sitting at the back, with their eyes wide open. And as we passed them as we left the court, they asked my sergeant, could we have details of that case, please? And I gave him a copy. I said, I brought a copy for you. Here you are.
So that's an interesting segue, though, because the ICAC was a very big deal, right? Like, corruption was pretty rampant all throughout the city. The police were very openly corrupt on many fronts. Were you... 1967, was the ICAC in operation at that point?
Oh, no. The police had an anti-corruption branch. They didn't I don't think, get many cases. when I was in the Commercial Crime Office, I got a very interesting conspiracy to defraud the Hong Kong government case, and the anti-corruption branch tried to pinch it off us because they argued that the Hong Kong telephone company, who were the victims, came under their remit, but we didn't let them have it. David Trench, the governor, started the process of introducing new legislation, which was introduced when Murray McLehose took over. And the Hong Kong Police Anti-Corruption Branch arrested Godber, Chief Superintendent, and 2 or 3 other superintendents. They'd started the process of using the new law, which had a lot more teeth than the old one. But because Godmer escaped to the UK and had to be extradited, they had a commission of inquiry, and then the ICAC was set up. But I still feel that if that hadn't happened, the Police Anti-Corruption Branch might have done a better job, because the rest of the Hong Kong government was hardly touched, and yet there was definitely corruption in other departments of all kinds.
Did you see a lot of corruption? Did you see much yourself?
You knew about it, but I tended to upset people and arrest the wrong people, and I was very quickly shuffled off into the Commercial Crime Office only in my second year of service, and it was, and I suppose I avoided any direct contact because of that.
Do you remember like the first corrupt act that you witnessed? Like the first thing you're like, wait, something's not right.
Yeah.
Like like you come in, you're like, okay, police, and you're like, wait a second, what was that?
Also, I love the idea that like you've got the new recruits naked marching in the outside, and then you see someone corrupt, you're like, well that's bringing some disrepute to the force.
Exactly. Yeah, let's make them take their pants off.
The first time I actually saw something, I think, was during the confrontation. It stepped up in different stages, and one stage was where they instituted transport strikes, and as is the want in Hong Kong, the private sector stepped in rapidly to supply public transport. We had things called dual-purpose vans in those days, which mainly plied in the new territories between villages. They were allowed to carry passengers, and they carried goods. And they all came down to the urban area and started charging people for journeys, you know. But I remember seeing a traffic police officer at the Star Ferry with his hand out collecting a bribe off every single dual-purpose van that passed through the Star Ferry. Yeah.
Wow. That's pretty.
But by the time, let me see now, 1979, it was all over, and from that time on, it was a very, very healthy organisation, and it was very refreshing. Yeah.
I mean, Mike Rouser, we talked about, he was on the ICAC, and he said that maybe a few people got away with crimes, maybe a few people were very harshly dealt with, but just such a massive percentage of police turned it around, and I think there was an amnesty as well, right? There was an amnesty for previous crimes.
Yeah, the perception within the police force was that the ICAC's tactics were totally unfair and unnecessary. They would descend on a division and arrest everybody, and then try to get police officers to give evidence against their colleagues. So they rounded up dozens of innocent people just to get to a few. So this caused widespread discontent, and it ended up with a march, a protest outside police headquarters, and they then marched down to ICAC headquarters, and there was a scuffle outside the offices, and I think a glass door got broken. But the governor was very concerned about all this and decided...
It was McElhose at that time?
He decided that enough was enough and gave an amnesty.
So one other thing that, just to jump around here a little bit, because you have so many things I want to tap into, but you had a brief career in Special Branch. What is Special Branch?
Special Branch is a British institution operated in all British territories and dependencies, and of course back in the UK. It had its origins, I think, with the problems with the Irish terrorism way back when. So it's an internal security organization. But in Hong Kong, it was also an intelligence organization as well as domestic security. So quite a large organization, and it kept tabs on left-wing and right-wing communist and KMT, Kuomintang. The Kuomintang were...
Did they have a presence down here?
Oh, yeah. They were always trying to cause trouble in Hong Kong, So there were different sections within the Special Branch which dealt with different things, and but the two major ones were the left and the right wing. I didn't spend very long there. I think I wish that I had been able to, but my health caught up with me, and I was told that I needed to go to the New Territories to get fresh air.
Which changed your life coming out here, right? Or did you already have a relationship with New Territories at that point? You live in the New Territories
I
now.
was seduced by the photographs on the pamphlet that I was issued before I turned up in Hong Kong of the rural NT policing. I really wished that I could have done that, but they wouldn't post me to the New Territories. They posted me to Bayview in Hong Kong Island. But eventually I did end up in the New Territories.
To get fresh air. That was
Yeah, well, that was, yeah.
I mean, fresher air. Let's put it that way. Not fresher air.
Well, certainly in those days.
Was there much pollution in those days?
We didn't have, no. No, we didn't.
Can you remember, they mustn't have had all of the reclamation that they've had now, because so much of Hong Kong Island in particular is reclaimed land. I mean, it's astounding when you see how much of it was water before.
The New Territories was leased by the British as a physical buffer against any threat of invasion by Japan or Russia or whatever at that time. So it was a 99-year lease.
But I couldn't understand that. What protection is it? Just having
just a physical buffer?
Yeah,
and they were determined not to interfere in any way with the way of life of the New Territories. But then, of course, approaching 97, the private sector got nervous, and also we needed to be able to expand. So the British talked to the Chinese, and the Chinese said, yeah, go ahead and develop it. So they then built all these new towns, which have been very, very successful. Yeah. But when I was there, of course, we didn't have much of that at all. And I was...
just villages, right?
Commanding the village patrol unit, which used to be called the Village Penetration Patrol. A very sort of 50s name, which caused some amusement because these police officers would go on four-man, 4-day patrols, and they'd stay over in villages. And it seems that quite a few of them formed liaisons with village ladies.
To put the job.
So the designation of the unit was a little bit
wrongfully encouraging.
Unfortunate, yes.
Could you stop penetrating the villages, please?
Yeah, it's in my job title. I'm trying to do my job, please.
Just doing my job, buddy.
A little bit less noise, and let me know if there's anyone else you're going to introduce me to.
So, we were the village patrol unit.
So let me ask you this. Back then, were there... Okay, so one of the things the bones I like to pick with, especially police, is the patrolling on the streets, checking people and stuff like that. Back then, were there a lot of, let's say, random checks that people patrolling streets and
Can I tap maybe a bit of a segue into this question that I know he wants to ask? how much... I would imagine that being a police officer, casing people, looking at people and thinking, what are they up to, what's going on? That's like a huge part of the job, right? So it's built into the psyche. Is that a fair statement?
I seem to have a little bit of a nose for suspicion. I quite often...
Vivek. yeah. I have a very big nose of suspicion.
I quite often reacted to something I saw and got lucky. Quite often. And I think the trick is that if you observe something which you think is suspicious, you need to follow up on it, either with a stop and question or a stop and search. But it's very easy, I think, for you to sort of give up on that, and because you're not often successful. But I always thought, if I'm suspicious, I'll do something about it, and it works. And of course, if you're patrolling at night time, then I think there's a much greater chance of getting lucky, as it were, because most of your good and honest people perhaps are already abed. And it's only the bad guys who are wandering the streets at night.
So during police training camp there isn't like, look at this photo. This is a prime default example of this person is something you want to stop on the streets. Because I really do have a feeling that if I know anyone who's trained to be a police, please check if they have that in the textbook and they've taken my picture in it. Because for some reason, can you tell me, what about me is...
You.
Yeah, okay, there
Why
you go.
might people stop you and question you?
When I said, what about me?
Is it anything to do with the fact that you look a little bit like Osama bin Laden?
Okay, just because I'm holding a mic now with a little goatee on my face, I would like to remind all our audience that he is now in the bottom of the ocean.
Yeah, I don't know why you chose to wear a turban for this recording.
Yeah. I mean, I'm losing my hair already. I'm trying to let you know I'm nowhere close to that guy. Okay, so Osama bin Laden. Okay, let me ask this. What can I do about me that can improve my situation?
How much facial surgery does he need?
Yeah, visually. What would you say I could do to maybe...
What role did race play in stopping people?
Oh, I don't think it plays any role at all. I mean... Certainly in Hong Kong, 99% of people are Chinese, so it doesn't apply, does it? I think, doesn't.
I think apply. Vivek's experience might contrast.
Yeah. So in my life, walking down the street, all the different races I'm amongst, I seem to be the one that's winning this particular race in the competition. So, So back then it was basically just general patrolling and everything and just looking at the city. Were there any standout points that you remember you were there looking at something suspicious and I'm going to check into that and find out, I was so wrong about this. Do you remember any story like that?
Yeah, when did you get any notable cases of getting it wrong?
Yeah, completely. You're like, whoa, this is
getting it wrong.
Yeah, you thought you saw something and it wasn't something.
Yeah, you followed up and they were like, okay, this is not right. Anything? You were that good.
I don't remember. I mean, if you stop and question someone and you stop and search someone and there's nothing there, you say, well, thank you very much.
We just went 40 minutes of pure crystal clean, great memory stories. And
quite honestly, I didn't put it in my book, so I don't remember anything specifically like that. No. No. The good cases, yes, I remember that.
There was one story which I know is not your story that you did tell in the book that I loved, and it was the guy who had a beer on the front of the ship he was the captain of. And so this bloke sat down on the hull of the ship to have a beer, and it's hit a wave, and he's gone off the side.
This is the famous Charlie Fisher story. He was a very, very capable Marine police officer. He sadly passed away only about a year ago. He won a governor's commendation for saving his vessel during a number 10 signal when the vessel broke free from its moorings. He saved the vessel and his crew. But he enjoyed his San Miguel. And the story goes that he was sailing off in launch number 1, which is a very large, or at the time was a very large vessel capable of ocean going. And he was on the stern of the ship, having a
San Miguel.
1 or 2 bottles of San Miguel. And it hit a large wave, and he parted company with the launch, and which sailed on through the harbour, past Green Island, and there he was in the harbour, suddenly sober. So he saw the lights of Green Island, and he swam to Green Island. When he got there, Green Island was an ammunition depot.
It's Kennedy Town side, right?
And it was...
Near there, yeah, just off there.
Yeah.
It was guarded by police officers from Marine Division, I'm sure. Anyway, he managed to wake them all up. And he said, I'm the commander of launch number 1. Oh, yeah, sure you are, you know. Anyway, he convinced them of his credentials and persuaded them to let him use the radio. So he then called launch number 1. Now, I don't know whether you have a helper at home, but, you know, you call home perhaps and say, I'm
in trouble.
Vivek. Oh, no, sorry, Vivek not here.
Oh.
Vivek's gone to the office. No, I am Vivek.
Yeah.
Right? Same thing happened to him. This is the launch commander. No, launch commander off watch. Can't talk to him. I'm the launch commander. Come back and get me. No. Mr. Fisher off watch. Can't disturb him. You know, it took him.
Yeah.
Eventually they came back and got him. Yeah.
Amazing.
Oh, man.
And a couple of other, incredible stories. You were one of the first responders for the Po Shan Road landslide, which is alleged, a big incident that happened in Hong Kong. And you even rescued, a boy, Jules, I think it was. One of the things I think it's hard for non-police officers to understand is what it is like to be the first person that has to run into, sometimes horrific incidents. How was that, experience?
Well, I wasn't the first responder, but I was living nearby, off duty. I was, in fact, the officer in charge of Fanling Court. It was a Sunday, and I'd been watching the 2 Ronnies on TV, and I heard this enormous bang, and I rang the Upper Levels police station. They told me that there'd been a landslide, so I ran up the hill, and the fire brigade was there, and I offered my assistance, and they said, yeah, get stuck in. So I helped rescue some people who were at the top of the landslide, and then later went down on a rope with a few more firemen, and ended up rescuing this boy. It took us 3.5 hours to dig him out.
And he lost his mother and his sibling.
Yeah, he'd been in a flat with his mother and his younger brother and a dog and a lawyer. And they'd only, unluckily, just come back from having dinner. And the lawyer heard this enormous rumbling, saw some movement on the hillside, and told them to run. And Jules ended up chasing the dog and was saved by a bookcase that fell on top of him. His younger brother was killed. His mother survived for a while and then drowned in the mud, I believe. And the lawyer survived and was eventually rescued by firemen and British Army after they dug a tunnel to get to him. Yeah.
And I just
68 people were killed in that landslide. And there was another terrible landslide over the harbour at Sao Mau Ping, where I think 50 people in a squatter settlement were engulfed by a collapsing man-made slope.
It's something that's happened a few times in the history of Hong Kong, but that Po Shan Road one was particularly bad.
Yeah, it was very dramatic, and unfortunately it had its roots in corruption, I'm sure, because a developer wanted to redevelop an old house and put up a 12 or 13 block of flats, and the government had said, yes, you can do that, but you must provide car parks within the building. In other words, and there was a height restriction. So when they did that, that meant there were less flats. And they decided that they were not going to do that. They were going to pretend that there was enough space on the plot to provide the car parking. And they then illegally cut the slope at the back of the plot, claiming it was rock when it wasn't, it was earth. So they cut that, and then it started to fall down because of heavy rain. Residents complained. The buildings department, public works department, then inspected it and threw a fit, oh my goodness, and told them they've got to put in sheet piling to protect it. It was too late. So there was a landslide on the site. This is after a week of extremely heavy rain. I mean, unbelievably heavy rain. Part of it collapsed and it buried a building on the other side of Conduit Road, yeah. And then they thought, oh, that's okay. There's nothing more is going to happen. And everybody, including the Director of Public Works, left. And then it collapsed at 9 o'clock that night. The whole of the hillside above Po Shan Road slipped. Took away a garden and a garage on Po Shan Road. Took away the building on Conduit Road. And then hit the building in Kowloon Road, 13 stories, 26 flats, I presume, and knocked it clean over. Right. And luckily it didn't go on further. There was another building site in Babington Path into which it collapsed, but it could have had a domino effect.
Oh. Yeah. Can you imagine if you were a property agent just taking a client to look at flats and you're like, yeah, this is a big discount.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't look at that one. They built that one differently.
Yeah, we're doing with the more surreal style of development.
I mean, I know that being a police officer, being in highly tense situations is more common than for the average Joe, but that must be so overwhelming to walk into that. I mean, do you remember just seeing it when you first got there?
Yeah, it was pretty awful, but there was obviously a job that needed to be done, and but I remember for weeks after the smell of the mud and what was mixed up in the mud, sewage, gas, everything else was unforgettable. Still remember it today. Pretty awful, but I'm pretty convinced of the basic reason that happened.
So just to lighten it up a little bit, you were involved in the first rally in mainland China, I think, right?
Well, it was the Hong Kong to Beijing rally, which I think ran for about 4 years, and I was involved for 2 of them. And basically, because it's a moving rally, we had what we called 6 special stage marshal teams with 4 vehicles and 3 guys in each vehicle. And those included a doctor, a paramedic, a radio technician, and a motor mechanic. And we would run the special stages across China.
What an incredible way to see China. At that point, what year were we talking?
90, in my case, 93, 94, I think.
So still relatively just opening up, really.
Yeah. Fascinating. Very, very hard work. Very, very tiring. We hardly got any sleep, hardly got anything to eat, before we were rushing off to the next stage. But, I remember one incident when we arrived in Beijing. Our last stage was up at the Great Wall of China. And then we had to join a long stream of rally vehicles. And the organizers had become quite concerned that a lot of our vehicles didn't make it to Beijing because of mechanical problems or accidents or whatever. And we had, so they'd said a bounty. You get $1,000 bounty if you bring a vehicle back in more or less one piece to Beijing, so that they could sell them on. And so this particular year, we'd almost made it, but our doctor managed to run over a rock and split the sump, and so we lost one vehicle. And another team were crowing about that, and they were in front of us in the queue to enter Tiananmen Square.
Having come all the way from Hong Kong.
Millions of people, watching this, lining us and cheering and clapping and God knows what. And I suppose the team in front of us lost attention, because at some point the front vehicle had to slam the brakes on, and all the other three ran into the back of each other. So within the space of 2 seconds, they lost $4,000. And we thought this was hilarious, and so did the crowd. They absolutely went bananas. Yeah.
$4,000 back then was a bigger deal.
Yeah, you could buy 6 apartments in Hong Kong for that much.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Guy, I can't thank you enough for sharing the stories. It's really been fascinating. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Well, I've enjoyed this. Quite an experience. Yes.